As I had mentioned in earlier videos that I would go more in depth about the adventures of Cadamosto, who wrote about all the things that he saw and witnessed in Africa and the coastal islands of the area during the mid-15th century. Some of the first European accounts of Africa were recorded by Zurara. Then the references were later relied on by Cadamosto. I would also like to point out that in one of my earlier Christopher Columbus videos, I also mentioned how Columbus referred to the Taino population on the American islands as having similar resemblances of those people on the Canary Islands. And here we are going to examine what Cadamosto wrote about these people of the Canaries. So we can take a deeper look and dive into what those people were and who they were on the Canaries. The same people that Christopher Columbus described being similar to. So who was Cadamosto? He was a Venetian explorer who sailed upon a caravel that belonged to a guy named Vicente Diaz on March 22nd, the year 1455, when Cadamosto was about 23 years old at that time. They first hit the island of Porto Santo. Then they later sailed to the Canary Islands, which he wrote about. He wrote about all of it, but we're going to be focusing on the Canary Islands here. Cadamosto's writings are some of the earliest known sources of writings about the Canary Islands, among a few other people I will briefly mention more about later. Cadamosto described the Canary Islands that of the 7 islands, 4 of them were populated by Christians, and the other 3 were populated by the original natives of the time, the Guanche. The 3 islands held a large population of these native people, and Cadamosto referred to these people as heathens. He said that they were a very dangerous people that lived in some mountainous areas that were fortified to protect these natives against invasions and attacks from whatever foreign people were to come. Therefore, the Christians never tried hard to take any of these 3 islands at that point. Cadamosto mostly wrote and documented mostly of what he had witnessed on the Christian islands. But the other islands he learned about them from what the other Christians on the 4 islands told him about, and what it was like and what happened there, and so on and so forth on these other 3 islands. See, Cadamosto wasn't only documenting war and trade, but he wrote about geography and the landscape and the customs and the inhabitants in these places. So in which, on the Canary Islands were the Guanche people who lived there prior to the Europeans showing up. And in later years, Cadamosto would write about the Africans when he visited Africa. So who were these natives that Christopher Columbus compared the Taino to? The people on the islands referred to themselves as the Canaries, or the Canarians. They were of multiple cultures, of possibly 1 or more races with varying degrees of DNA. The people spoke so many different languages that many of the people had a hard time communicating with each other. These islands were probably initially just like any other nation state that fought and traded with each other. The natives of the islands were governed by 9 governors that they referred to as dukes. The elected duke won his title by his strength and competence rather than by a dynastic lineage of rulers. And when someone is newly elected, some of the people offer themselves to be sacrificed in honor of the newly elected. Yeah, they sacrifice themselves. I guess every culture can seem strange to another. And after the self-sacrificed person throws himself to death, the newly elected duke then pays respects to the family of the self-made victim. But was he self-made? Did he have control of himself? We can see in modern times that Islamic people blow themselves up all the time. But I don't know if the mosque will give money to the family of the victim that blew himself up and be like, hey, thanks for your child for blowing himself up. Here's a few bucks. Suicide bombers happen more often than you think. 7 people were just killed the other day in Afghanistan because of a suicide bomber. So when Cadamosto wrote about these people killing themselves over their belief system, we see the same kind of thing happen in modern times, but just in different radical beliefs. And what makes this belief radical? When it's farther from the moral norms of one's own culture. But who says what's right or wrong? The different groups often waged war against each other on these islands. Cadamosto said that they slay each other like beasts. They only fought with tipped spears and stones, in which Cadamosto describes these in detail. If you want to get this book or check out his memoirs, there you go. And how did these natives live? Most of these people were naked. Some of them wore goat skins to cover their front and behind. Others painted their skin green, red, or yellow in place of clothes, and they thought highly of this covering, this painted covering. I guess, like, instead of a guy saying to a girl, "Hey, nice pants," he would say, "Hey, I like that paint on your legs." These Guanche people, they didn't have wooden houses or straw houses, Cadamosto wrote, but they lived in caves and caverns. They ate figs and other fruits. They drank a lot of goat's milk, which Cadamosto said they had plenty of. They produced a lot of goat skins, and from the animals they carved up for food and clothes. They had a bunch of food and clothes from these animals. They received a good, nutritious fat that they used from the animals, probably from goat, referred to as tallow. Then they also made some good cheeses that were produced on the islands as well. I am guessing that the Europeans created these cheeses, but it is possible that the cheese was made by the native people as well at the time. Cadamosto just refers to the types of food that were on the islands. I don't know if he was very specific about who made it. And of their religion, Cadamosto said that they had no God, implying that the natives were atheists. But then he describes things that they worshipped somehow. He doesn't go into detail of how the islanders worshipped anything, but he says that they worship the sun and the moon and the stars. Cadamosto said that they have strange, idolatrous fantasies. He doesn't explain. They could have pointed to the stars and called out constellations that Cadamosto never heard of. They may have had a mythology, but then to them, a reality of mystical things that happen as a result of the stars. Cadamosto didn't mention any of that. And it's interesting to see that humans from every part of the world in history studied the stars. Ancient Greece, the Mayans, the Egyptians, and many others studied the stars. I personally don't know anyone besides myself that can point out more than one constellation in the sky, besides the common Big Dipper sighting, ignoring the Ursa Major. Although Christopher Columbus did use the Big Dipper as a guide in the night sky, so I'm not knocking the Big Dipper. I wonder about the historical fascination of the sky, though, to where the modern day people on average could care less about it. Is it because people were more fascinated with the unknown in the past, and now we know, so we don't care anymore? Or was it because people back then had too much time on their hands, so they stared at the stars all night? It's an interesting thought. But Cadamosto said these people were really into it, and they worshipped it. As for the women, they weren't seen much, but a man was allowed to have many wives. Cadamosto never mentioned if a woman had many husbands, though. That seems like a popular thing in history. Men having many wives, but not many. You never hear. I never heard of a woman having many husbands. Yeah, this culture, the woman has 4 to 7 husbands. One husband does the gardening. A couple are in bed. The other one washes the floors. But men having many wives throughout different cultures in history was a very popular thing. And I wonder why. And I would like to hear the LGBTQ and trans activists explain that phenomenon. The Canary Islands they didn't marry the women if they were virgins. And it was held in high regards and honor for a woman to have sex with a guy and break her virginity so that she was to be marriage material thereafter. So these women were most likely traded or gifted and sometimes stolen through battles. It is a possibility because these people share commonalities with other groups of people in history. So it is a big possibility. But it isn't noted by Cadamosto, at least. The women were most likely traded or gifted and sometimes stolen through battles, but it is interesting that he wrote about this romantic aspects of the Guanche people. The Christians would witness a lot of these things when they visited the islands at night. They would go to go sneak into the islands at nighttime so they could steal people, have little battles at night, having this advantage of the darkness. The Christians would steal some of these people and then sell them back to Spain. And some Christians were stolen by the Canarians to where they were held prisoner, and then they worked for the natives. The natives were like, "Why kill them when we could use them to do things?" The Canary Islanders would turn these Christian men into slaves, to where these Christian slaves would then skin goats, among other things. And skinning goats was perceived as something degrading to the culture at the time. So he's like, "Screw that, I ain't doing it, get the slave to do it." But some of these Christians were ransomed back to Christian lands, and so that's how we got this insight. So he says. And there was a lot of other references to the people, the Canaries, in which were from like historical Arab sources that have noted about the Canary Islands, about who these people were, what they looked like, and what they did. There are sources that say that the natives were of blonde hair and blue eyes. Then some sources say that they were of Asiatic descent through Arab exploration. There are a good number of African descent that claim that they were of the same people. And since we believe that none of these natives exist anymore, purely, of pure DNA, besides those that were sold as sex slaves to the Muslim armies or slave quarters of the Europeans that are the ancestors of today's people, we still don't know exactly who these people were, although they do share some similar customs of the Arab Muslims in the African states of having multiple wives back in the mainland. There is strong evidence that supposes that the majority of the people on the Canaries were of the Northwest African Berbers. Muslims invaded most of Northwest Africa in the 7th century and flourished the trans-Saharan slave trade to peak around the 9th and 10th centuries. Then these Arabs could have easily brought a lot of these African slaves to the Canary Islands, who were then mixed with the Asian DNA and the Arabs of the Northwest African DNA, resulting in the people who identified with skin tones of some of the modern-day Ethiopian people, who have both African and Arab features and a brownish skin tone. These are possibilities that seem more logical than a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy that was living on the islands prior to that. It is most likely that the Taino people that Columbus had met were part of the Asian waves of people that traveled across the Beringia to the Americas from Eurasia during the last ice age, either 14,000 years ago or prior. There are people of the region in present-day Canary Islands that have different DNA results due to the mixture of people that visited the islands over the past 600 years and prior. Some populations have more European blood while others have more African DNA. There isn't any concrete evidence that says one is more evident than the other, but some scientists believe that they can trace those ancestral roots. There's also other scientists that believe little boys can actually be little girls trapped in a body with a penis. So it's hard to know who to believe these days, especially even if they have a badge that says they're a scientist. Anyways, that's it for this episode. Subscribe and share and thumbs up. If you don't like it, you can send this to your enemies. This video was just to bring up Cadamosto because I said I would. And I'm going to have some more research and videos on him about his trips to Africa. I just wanted to start off with the Canary Islands because that's when Christopher Columbus referred to the Canary Islands. So I want to reference that because I said I would. And so here we are, referencing back to what I said I was going to reference to. And so anyways, next video is going to be next week. Stay tuned, subscribe, thumbs up. If you hate the video, send it to your enemies. Adios.